Interstate Secession, the new buzz in the great urban-rural divide. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is another declaration of truth from your host, Terry A. Hurlbut. Interstate secession happens when one or more counties, parishes, or independent cities, whatever, want to change state allegiance. That's getting more attention all the time lately. Already, 9 rural counties in eastern Oregon have voted to leave Oregon and join the neighboring state of Idaho. Now, the county commissions of Morrow and Wheeler counties have put the interstate secession question on the ballot for midterms. I have that from the Washington Times, by the way. The government this movement relates somewhat to the Great Sortation, with this difference: it involves parts of states seeking different state governments. I want to tell you what interstate secession means, how to bring it about, what stands in the way, and what people in affected territories might do instead. Now, before I explain, I do want to shout out to the prime sponsor of this channel, which is Conservative News and Views. Link in the description. Be sure to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom for that link. Lots of great merchandise there. Especially this t-shirt I have chosen for today, which reads, "Thanks for the free trial of communism, but I'd like to cancel." That's the problem in this case. Rural counties everywhere are boiling with resentment at the city dwellers who seem bent on collectivizing everything, including what goes on out in the sticks. Hence this new movement. Just one more thing. If you like what you're about to hear, you can like this video. You can also click the bell icon to get a notice every time I come out with a new one. In fact, do you see the new logo, the new icon rather, heart-shaped with a US dollar sign in it? That's the super thanks icon. If you really want to keep these videos coming, click on that and leave me a tip. Any currency will do. Now then, I already hear you asking, what is interstate secession? Interstate secession is secession between states and not between nations. I've already discussed international secession, in which a state wants to break away from the Union. Contrary to popular belief, the Constitution does not explicitly forbid that. The real reason for the war between the states, if it wasn't to please some international financiers and arms dealers, was to abolish slavery. Given the cognitive dissonance of Christians trying to defend slavery from the Bible, which you can't do, take my word for that, war became inevitable. No such excuse exists today for the federal government to go to war to stop red states from seceding. The alternative is, of course, for conservative values to win in the next several federal election cycles, and that looks far more likely today than it did a year ago. Interstate secession is actually easier than a state breaking away from the Union. The Constitution explicitly provides a mechanism for interstate secession by a county or other local governing unit. The only problem is, it requires the consent of the legislature of the state one wishes to leave. It also requires the consent of the legislature of any state one wishes to join and of the Congress. So, what does the Constitution say about this? The Constitution says, and I quote, "New states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of 2 or more states or parts of states, without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as of the Congress." Unquote, Article 4, Section 3. Now, one or more counties from one state only, seeking to become a state in their own right, would be forming a state within the jurisdiction of another. That concerns the state to which they currently belong, and its legislature must consent. 2 or more counties from different states would be forming a state by the junction of parts of those states. Counties joining another state would be forming a state from the junction of the state they wish to join and their part of the state that now includes them. Either way, that requires the consent of 2 state legislatures as well as of the Congress. Now then, I hear some of you saying that there's a semicolon in Article 4, Section 3, right after the part about no state forming within the jurisdiction of another. Forget the semicolon, because what lies beyond the semicolon is not a complete sentence nor even a complete clause. The omission of the word shall from the junction formation clause is an ellipsis, is an elliptical construct. Grammatically, such an ellipsis must never span 2 sentences. So I read that article as letting 1 or more counties form their own state, but to do that, they still need the consent of the legislature of the state they wish to leave. The Greater Idaho movement, to the homepage of which I have left a link in the description, gets by far the most attention among interstate secession movements. The leaders of that movement have drawn a map showing what parts of Oregon they want to include. I have left a link in the description to that too. 9 counties have already voted yes on a proposition to secede from Oregon and join Idaho. They are Klamath, Lake, Harney, Malheur, Grant, Baker, Union, Jefferson, and Sherman. Wallowa, Morrow, and Wheeler counties will vote on interstate secession next. Gilliam, Umatilla, Crook, Deschutes, and Wasco counties would have to agree before the Greater Idaho movement took the next step. Greater Idaho wants all of Gilliam, Umatilla, and Crook counties, plus portions of Deschutes and Wasco counties east of the boundary line in yellow on the map that they have drawn. I know of at least 4 other interstate secession movements. Now let's see, we have the state of Jefferson, that would include parts of Northern California and Southern Oregon. The only problem is they would be landlocked. Then we have New California. That's a proposal to split California right down the middle, north to south. San Bernardino County's Board of Supervisors voted to consider this, among other options. Then we see Western Maryland proposing to join West Virginia, and several Virginia counties that themselves wanted to join West Virginia to protect their Second Amendment rights. West Virginia's legislature at least considered extending them a formal invitation. Now, why did I put that in the past tense? For a simple reason. The Virginia pre-midterm of 2021. Virginians elected Republican Glenn Youngkin as governor, and also flipped the House of Delegates. I live here in Virginia, and I can tell you, that was like a steam pressure relief valve opening. Virginia interstate secession sentiment has given way to determination to flip the state Senate next year. But that kind of steam pressure relief is less likely to happen in Oregon. Greater Idaho movement leaders lament that the urban west of Oregon, especially the cities of Portland, Eugene, and Salem, routinely outvote the rural and conservative east. So residents of eastern Oregon have been talking interstate secession for more than a year. NPR talked about that last year, in fact. The Greater Idaho site lists the advantages of interstate secession to eastern Oregon residents. Before I get into them, I want to shout out to a sponsor who can really help you through the economic storms to come. That sponsor is oursilverlines.com. Do you feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by? You are not alone. The fluctuating economy, employment issues, and unexpected changes in life have left many families struggling over the past few years. Collecting gold and silver can help shield you against many of these challenges. But if you're like me many years ago, you don't know where or how to start. Our Silver Lines helps by connecting you with thousands of members who are learning the secrets to creating and protecting true wealth by collecting precious metals. Now, whether you just want to collect rare and unique coins or take advantage of the business opportunities that company provides, they can help you learn to live an exceptional life. Visit oursilverlives.com. Learn how you can build a legacy for your future. Now, what does Greater Idaho offer the residents of these counties that I named? Well, first, they point out that 79% of the state's voters live in northwestern Oregon, and from that region come the liberal voters that control the governor's mansion, the 2 U.S. Senate seats, and the legislature. From that control, Greater Idaho sees crippling crime, non-punishment of criminal offenders, including wildfire arsonists, and that affects those residents directly, even if the riots do not, infringement of their right to keep and bear arms, high taxes, poor forest management that creates a fire hazard, economic stagnation due to taxes and regulations, and lack of effective representation due to the incessant outvotes. No wonder they want to leave. But so far, Idaho's legislature has not yet passed a resolution to invite them to join. But one Idaho state representative did ask her colleagues to consider one, according to the Independent in the UK. Interstate secession does have ample precedent, and not merely the secession of West Virginia during the war between the states. As the Independent reminds us, Kentucky seceded from Virginia in 1792, and Maine from Massachusetts in 1820. Furthermore, Alabama and Mississippi are both breakaway states from Georgia. So what's standing in the way? Again, a breakaway movement like Greater Idaho needs the consent of 3 bodies to make their dream real. They are the legislatures of the state they wish to leave and join, and the Congress. Until this midterms, Greater Idaho had no prospect of winning the consent of Congress. With midterms, that will change. Now, representation in both chambers of Congress would effectively stay the same after any such secession. Idaho and Oregon would continue to send 2 senators from their current parties. But instead of Oregon sending 4 Democrats and 1 Republican, Idaho is going to send 3 Republicans, and Oregon the 4 Democrats. The one salient practical difference Greater Idaho would make to the Democrats is in the Electoral College. Oregon's 2nd District just sprawls across eastern and central Oregon, and the Greater Idaho proposed yellow line would split it, and not down the middle either. It would be over to the west. So Idaho would gain a House seat and Oregon would lose it. Moreover, Pete DeFazio's seat might flip Republican permanently. Now, that change might or might not stop the deal, if Senate rules allow a filibuster on a resolution of consent to interstate secession. Now, why might Idaho's legislature invite the Oregon counties to join? Well, Greater Idaho offers 5 inducements. First, it solidifies the conservative voting majority in Idaho, besides giving Idaho 1 more presidential electoral vote. It also enhances tax revenues, even above what revenues those counties produce today, by reason of Idaho's low tax and regulation burdens. Here's a big one for Idaho. Annexing those counties would transfer control of a hydroelectric dam and the rest of a key watershed from Oregon to Idaho. This proposal also gives Idaho room to grow and moves Oregon permissiveness further away. Now that leaves Oregon's legislature, and that is the big one. In order to gain their consent, those who want interstate secession must make either release of those counties worth the legislature's while, or retention of those counties not worth the trouble. Go down, Moses, way west to Salem land. Tell the governor to let my people go. Greater Idaho has already suggested the kind of trouble Eastern Oregon's Republican contingent in the legislature could make. They could, for example, walk out of the legislature and deny a quorum. or if they don't do that, then they stall any proceedings by moving to have every bill read out loud in full. Greater Idaho would then offer a simple solution. Let us go and we'll be out of your hair. Greater Idaho also points out that highway maintenance in these sparsely settled counties requires a state subsidy. Interstate Secession would transfer these highways to Idaho to maintain. Highways aside, Oregon owns very little land in the counties involved. Finally, statewide Oregon office holders could be more confident of re-election. Not only would conservative Eastern Oregon residents become Idaho residents, but current conservative residents of Western Oregon would move out. They could then live in Idaho while working in Portland, Eugene, or Salem. The major disadvantage to Oregon, other than losing an electoral vote, is losing 2/3 of its land area. But Oregon would not lose any comparable proportion of its population. Now, if they want to make any more trouble than that, they're going to need far greater cooperation from others. The movement would need the full support of the sheriff, county commission, or board of supervisors, and executive or administrator of each county involved, of the legislature and governor of Idaho, and of the Congress, and more particularly the clerk of the House of Representatives. What kind of trouble are we talking about? Well, sending tax revenues, fees, and so on to Boise, not Salem. Applying to the Idaho Division of Motor Vehicles, not the Oregon Division, for driver's licenses and vehicle registration. Expanding Idaho's judiciary and highway patrols into the Oregon counties. Making the county boards of elections answerable to Idaho's Secretary of State. And the big one, sending a representative to Congress nominally from Idaho rather than Oregon. Now, this kind of trouble, I don't think Idaho really wants to start making it. Now, to be clear, the Greater Idaho movement does not propose making any kind of trouble beyond quorum denial and floor stalling in the legislature. Now, the obvious alternatives to interstate secession for any individual resident are sell your home and land if you own any and move out, or else campaign hard to start winning statewide elections. The second alternative is now available to Virginians, as it has not been since the days of Governor George Allen. Governor Youngkin won because even traditionally liberal voters saw what was happening in Virginia schools. "We didn't sign on for this," they cried. And candidate and former Governor Terrence McAuliffe seemed to be saying, "Oh yes you did, now get with the program." To which they replied, "Oh yeah, we'll see about that." Which is how Glenn Youngkin carried the college town of Ashland, where I happen to live. Could the same thing happen in Oregon? Well, Greater Idaho says that with 79% of the state's voters in solid blue northwestern Oregon, the answer is no. But they might be wrong. The New York Times suggests that a Republican just might become governor of Oregon this midterms. They seem to have an independent candidate playing spoiler. That election will be very interesting to watch. The Great Sortation will largely be a movement of, well, movement, pardon the pun, as in people moving out. But Oregon could turn into a flashpoint in a debate that touches on the meaning of land ownership in America, as well as yet another rural-urban divide. Except for one thing. Liberals tend not to reproduce as fast as conservatives do. 1 or 2 generations might then suffice to flip Oregon. Or if a Republican does win this time, he can start by addressing the kind of discontent that would drive people to consider interstate secession. Link in the description of the article to the homepage and the map from Greater Idaho and to Conservative News and Views. I've also left links to the awesome CNAV Store and to oursilverlines.com, as I also mentioned. You know already about how to like a video, turn on notifications, and leave a tip. On the end screen, I'm going to leave a subscribe link to my channel and links to earlier videos on the Great Sortation, and also a video from the Timcast ILP channel discussing the Greater Idaho movement and the kind of trouble they could make. This is Terry A. Hurlbut delivering another declaration of truth and reminding you to let the truth set you free.